The morning after my wedding, I was sipping coffee from a paper cup, barefoot on the cool marble floor of our honeymoon suite, watching the first light of October press itself thin and gold against the curtains. And I was thinking, with a quiet and astonishing certainty, that this was the happiest I had ever been in my life. I had no idea that in 4 minutes my phone would ring, and a woman whose name I didn't yet know would whisper 3 sentences that would dismantle every single thing I believed about the man sleeping in the next room, the mother who had smiled at me from the front pew, and the 2 years I had spent building what I thought was a life. The woman's name was Sandra. She said she was the morning supervisor at the front desk of the Grand Halcyon Hotel, and she told me that the housekeeper had found a USB drive wedged beneath the box spring of the bed in Suite 412, our suite, the one Daniel and I had vacated barely 90 minutes before. Sandra's voice had been steady at first, rehearsed, the kind of careful professional composure that good hotel staff practice until it becomes second nature. But then there was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something small and urgent, something she clearly had not rehearsed. "Mrs. Hartley," she said, and even the use of my brand-new married name felt wrong in that moment, felt like a costume I hadn't tried on yet. "You need to come back right now and see this for yourself, but please, come alone, and don't tell your husband a word." Another pause, half a breath long, filled with something I could not name. "Please," she said again, the words soft and insistent, and it was that second "please," the way it sat in my ear like a stone dropped into still water, sending rings out and out and out into silence, that told me she had already looked inside the drive, that she had seen enough to be afraid on my behalf. I told Daniel I had forgotten my earrings. "I need to go back now and show you the woman I was before that phone call, because I think it matters. I think you need to understand how completely ordinary I believe my life to be, how warm and solid and earned it felt, before you can understand what it meant to watch it come apart in the space of a single morning. I was 33 years old. I was an architect at a mid-sized firm in the city, Callaway & Reed, 12 years in, recently promoted to senior associate. And I was good at my job in the quiet, unglamorous way that means you arrive early and leave late, and your clients call you back, and your name gets passed around at dinner parties as someone reliable, someone who listens, someone you can trust. I lived in the house my grandmother had left me, a craftsman bungalow on Linden Street with a deep porch and a magnolia tree in the front yard that bloomed every April in great, creamy, extravagant fists of white. My grandmother, Vera Matthews, had bought that house in 1971 with money she saved for 11 years, working double shifts at a textile factory while raising 2 children on her own. She died 17 months before my wedding, and she left me the house and everything in it, and the sum she had spent her whole life quietly accumulating, and I had not yet fully absorbed what that meant, the weight of it, the responsibility, the love compressed into the act of leaving something behind for someone you love. The house was worth a little over $800,000 in a neighborhood that had gentrified steadily and expensively over the preceding decade. I did not think of it as a financial asset. I thought of it as home. I thought of the smell of the cedar closets and the way the kitchen light fell warm and amber in the evenings, and the particular creak of the third porch step, which I had always meant to fix and somehow never did. I had met Daniel Hartley at a work function, a charity auction at the Rosewood Gallery, the kind of event where everyone circulates with a glass of wine and a name badge and tries to look more interested in the art than they are. He had been standing in front of a large, abstract piece, a wash of deep blue and silver that looked, to me, like a sound rather than a painting, and he had said, when I stopped beside him, "I keep thinking it looks like the moment just before a storm breaks, not the lightning, the second before." And I had thought, this one. Not in a reckless way, in a way that felt at the time like recognition. He was 36, Tall, olive-skinned, with dark eyes that were warm when he listened to you and that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. He worked in investment consulting, a vague but apparently lucrative profession, and he was attentive in a way I had not often experienced from men. He remembered things. The name of the cafe I mentioned once, the novel I had been trying to finish for a year, the way I liked my coffee. He was, I believed, a good man. I believed this for 2 full years before I stopped believing it. We moved slowly, which should have felt safe. We dated for 8 months before we made our relationship official, spent another 6 months negotiating the rhythms of 2 people building something together. His apartment in Riverside, my house on Linden Street, the gradual migration of his things into my space until his reading glasses were on my nightstand and his good coat was on my coat rack and his favorite mug, a deep green one, slightly chipped, was in my cabinet, and the house felt different in the way that houses do when they become homes for more than one person. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in October in the kitchen of the house on Linden Street with a ring his grandmother had left him, or so he said, and a speech that was quiet and earnest and nothing like what I had imagined, which made it better than I had imagined. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I loved him. I had given him the kind of slow, deliberate love that I gave to things I intended to keep, and I believed, completely, that he felt the same way about me. Eleanor Hartley, Daniel's mother, was 63 years old and looked, at first glance, like the kind of woman who organizes bake sales and keeps a terrifyingly neat house and calls everyone dear in a voice that is just warm enough to make you feel included and just careful enough to make you wonder, later, if you were. She was small and precisely put together. Silver hair cut in a blunt, elegant bob, a fondness for cashmere and muted colors, pearl earrings that she wore every single day without exception, as if they were a part of her face. She smelled of Chanel No. 5 and hand cream, and she had a way of entering a room that was not exactly dramatic, but was nevertheless impossible to ignore, as though the geometry of any space she occupied quietly rearranged itself around her. She had been widowed for 11 years, since Daniel's father, Gerald, died of a heart attack at 61. And she had, as far as I could tell, spent those 11 years being quietly central to Daniel's life in a way that was just slightly too central, just slightly too constant to feel entirely healthy. Not that I said this out loud. I was a peacemaker. I had always been a peacemaker. It was one of my worst qualities, though it took me a very long time to understand that. In the early months, Eleanor and I maintained a perfectly functional and carefully maintained distance from one another, which is to say, we were polite in the way of 2 people who have decided, independently, to make the best of a situation neither of them would have chosen. She called me Claire, dear, in a tone that managed to make my name sound like a concession. She complimented my cooking once and then spent the next 4 months subtly adjusting Daniel's tastes away from it, mentioning at family dinners that Daniel had always preferred dishes she then made in front of him. She asked, at our first meeting, what I did for work, and when I told her I was an architect, she said, "Oh, how interesting," in the exact tone people use when they mean something else entirely. She had a habit, which I noticed early but dismissed as eccentricity, of asking questions about the house on Linden Street. Not aggressively, not obviously, just persistently. "So it was your grandmother's? And it came to you outright? No siblings, no other claims?" And I would answer, and she would nod, and her expression would be the very image of polite interest, and I would tell myself I was imagining the thing underneath it. I told myself that a lot in those 2 years. I told myself I was imagining it when Daniel became evasive about his finances, when he said things like, "I'll sort that out," and "it's complicated," when I asked gentle questions about whether we should combine accounts after the wedding. I told myself I was imagining it when he started taking calls in the other room, his voice low, and would come back looking slightly too casual, slightly too deliberately relaxed, the way a person looks when they have been rehearsing how to look normal. I told myself I was imagining it when Eleanor asked me, at a Sunday lunch in April, whether I had updated my will since inheriting the house. "It's just good practice, dear," she said, and her eyes were perfectly steady, and her voice was perfectly warm, and her pearl earrings caught the light. "One wants to be organized." I told myself I was imagining it, and I kept on with the wedding planning, and I chose the flowers, ivory and blush, and I tasted 17 different cakes before selecting the one with the cardamom buttercream, and I picked out a dress that made my father go quiet in a particular way that men go quiet when they are trying very hard not to cry. And I believed, with the stubborn, blinkered faith of a person who has decided to be happy, that everything was fine. The wedding was on a Saturday in October, the kind of October day that feels like a gift. All clear blue sky and warm light, and leaves the color of copper and old gold drifting down from the maples along the garden path of the Ashgrove estate, which was where Daniel had insisted on holding the ceremony. 200 guests, a string quartet, my father walking me down the aisle with a hand that trembled slightly, which I attributed to emotion. Eleanor in the front row in a dove-gray cashmere suit and her pearl earrings, watching me come down the aisle with an expression I could not then read and can now read perfectly. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel cried when he said his vows, and I thought, watching the tears move on his face, that whatever my reservations about his mother, whatever the small, persistent doubts I had chosen not to examine too closely, none of it mattered, because this was real. This right here was real. The reception was loud and warm and full of dancing, and the cardamom buttercream cake was everything I had hoped it would be. And my best friend Maya danced until her heels gave out, and she finished the night barefoot, and my father toasted me in a speech that lasted 7 minutes and made half the room cry, and Eleanor gave a toast too, shorter, more controlled, all warmth and no heat, and Daniel held my hand under the table through most of the dinner, his thumb moving in slow, absent circles across my knuckles. We left around midnight in a shower of flower petals and laughter, and got to the Grand Halcyon just after 12:30, and the suite was candlelit, and there was a basket of champagne and chocolates on the bureau with a card that said, in Eleanor's precise, small handwriting, "For my darling son and his new bride, with all my love." Daniel read the card and smiled, and I thought, I was wrong about her. I was imagining it. She loves him, and she is trying in her way, and I am going to be generous enough to let that be enough. We drank 1 glass of the champagne. We did not finish the bottle. In the morning, Daniel was still asleep, deep and heavy in the way he slept when he had been drinking, sprawled on his back with one arm thrown over his face, and I had woken early, as I always do, and found the paper cups of complimentary coffee set on the tray outside the door by housekeeping, and carried them in and sat by the window and watched the gold light press through the curtains and thought about the word wife and what it would feel like to carry it. It felt, in that moment, like something I had grown into rather than put on, settled, permanent, right. My phone rang at 7:42. I told Daniel the earrings were the small gold drops my grandmother had given me for my 30th birthday, and that I must have left them on the bathroom shelf. He made a sleepy noise of assent and pulled the duvet tighter, and I dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, the soft jeans and cream blouse I had worn for the drive over the night before, and I took my bag and I left. In the elevator, I checked my reflection in the polished bronze doors and thought that I looked like a woman who had stayed up too late celebrating, bright-eyed in a slightly spent way, a little flushed. I looked, in other words, like someone who had no idea that her life was about to be reconstructed from the ground up. Sandra was waiting for me in the lobby. I knew her immediately, somehow. She was 30-something, black, with natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the kind of deep, still eyes that belong to people who have seen enough of the world to take its cruelties, with patience rather than shock. She was standing just to the left of the front desk, wearing her Halcyon uniform, and when she saw me coming across the marble lobby floor, she straightened slightly, and her expression did something complicated. A brief, involuntary compression, the face of someone bracing for impact on someone else's behalf. "Mrs. Hartley," she said. "Claire," I said. "Just Claire." She nodded once. "Thank you for coming, and for coming alone." She paused. "Has your husband contacted you since you left?" "No," I said. "He was asleep. Why?" She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, "I need to show you something. I want you to know that I opened the drive to identify whose it was. That's standard procedure. We photograph the contents, the file list, to log them in our lost and found system. I wasn't trying to pry, but when I saw the folder names, I opened one file, and then I couldn't stop." She said this last part quietly, and I noticed that she had the USB drive in her hand in a small Ziploc bag, the kind the hotel staff used, I assumed, to keep found items clean. She held it out to me and I took it, and then she led me to a small office behind the front desk, a manager's office cluttered and warmly lit, with a desktop computer and a dying succulent, and a framed photo of two small girls on the shelf, daughters, I assumed, who looked like her. And she sat down and opened a window on the computer and turned the screen toward me. "Sit down," she said, not unkindly. "Please, sit down before you look." I sat. The desktop showed a File Explorer window, and in the center of the screen was the contents of the USB drive. 4 folders. The first was labeled Matthews Property. The second was labeled Daniel Communications. The third was labeled Legal Templates, Revised. The fourth was labeled, in plain, unadorned letters, Sophie File. I stared at that last folder for a moment. The way you stare at a word you recognize but cannot parse, a word that seems simple and familiar and is nevertheless refusing to mean anything. My name is not Sophie. I am not Sophie. And yet the folder was there, and it sat beside the one with my family's name on it, and the cold that moved through me in that moment was not the cold of the air-conditioned room. It was the cold of a body understanding something its mind has not yet agreed to. I clicked on Matthews Property first. The folder contained 9 files. The first was a PDF labeled POA_Claire_M_Hartley_final.pdf power of attorney. I opened it, and the letters swam slightly before my eyes, and I had to make myself breathe. A long, deliberate breath, the kind I used when I was looking at structural drawings that weren't adding up. And then I read it. It was a power of attorney document. It bore what appeared to be my signature. It gave Eleanor Hartley, full name Eleanor Grace Hartley, of 14 Pemberton Court, sole authority to manage, sell, lease, transfer, or otherwise dispose of any and all real property held in the name of Claire Matthews, including but not limited to the property at 18 Linden Street. It was dated 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks before my wedding. It was notarized, and I had never in my life signed it. My hands did not shake. That is the part I always find strange when I try to remember it. I had expected, reading that document, to feel the shaking that people describe, the cold sweat, the trembling fingers, the physical manifestation of terror. Instead, I felt something quite different, a profound, absolute stillness, as if every part of me had gone very quiet in order to hear something important. My heartbeat slowed, my breathing steadied. I read the document twice from top to bottom, and on the second reading I noticed that my signature, the one at the bottom above the notary stamp, was slightly wrong. I have a very particular signature developed over 20-odd years of signing architectural drawings and contracts. The C of my first name curves high and extravagant before settling into the loop of the L, and the M of my last name is flat-topped, almost military. This signature had a C that didn't curve high enough, and an M with rounded tops, soft and uncertain. It was close. It was, perhaps, close enough to fool someone who hadn't spent a lifetime watching their own name leave a pen. But it was not mine. Someone had forged my signature on a legal document giving them control over my grandmother's house. I opened the second file. It was a draft purchase agreement, a contract of sale for the property at 18 Linden Street. Buyer listed as Oakmere Property Holdings, LLC. I had never heard of Oakmere Property Holdings. The purchase price was listed at $640,000, more than $150,000 below current market value. The seller's name on the contract was mine. The date was 3 months from today. I sat very still and listened to the sound of the succulent dying on the shelf. "Are you all right?" Sandra asked. She had moved to stand near the door, giving me space, watching me with an expression of quiet, careful attention. "No," I said, "not even a little bit." She nodded, and she did not say anything else because there was nothing to say, and she seemed to understand that. I moved to the second folder, Daniel Communications. The emails went back 14 months. The earliest was dated in August of the previous year, 9 months before Daniel proposed to me. The subject line was Timeline. Daniel's email address was at the top, Eleanor's below. I will not reproduce the full text of that exchange here because I do not think I could bear to, but I will tell you what it contained because it is important, because you need to understand the nature of what had been built around me, quietly and carefully and entirely without my knowledge, while I had been choosing flowers and tasting cake and believing I was falling in love. The email chain discussed a timeline. It discussed Claire, me, referred to by my first name, as if I were an item on a to-do list, and it discussed the house on Linden Street and the figure of $800,000 and something called the Matthews asset. It discussed the importance of moving before the 1-year mark of the marriage, at which point certain legal protections would, apparently, become more difficult to work around. It discussed the power of attorney as the preferred vehicle, since direct forgery of a title transfer was too trackable. That word, too trackable, sitting in the body of an email sent by my fiancé to his mother 11 months before our wedding, pressing against my eyes like a thumb. There was an email from Daniel dated 2 months before the proposal. The proposal, the kitchen, the ring, the quiet, earnest speech, in which he wrote, "She still doesn't know about the Ridgway situation. Keep it that way until the papers are ready." I did not yet know what the Ridgway situation was. I would know very shortly. There was one more email that I read before I had to stop. It was from 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks before our wedding, the same period when the forged power of attorney had been notarized. Daniel wrote, "I do care about her, Mom. I want you to know that. It's not nothing." And Eleanor had written back within the hour, "That's fine, darling. Just not more than you care about staying out of debt." I closed the email window. I sat with my hands flat on the desk and I breathed. Outside the office, through the closed door, I could hear the sounds of a hotel beginning its morning. The distant bell of an elevator, the low rumble of a luggage cart, a burst of laughter from somewhere near the entrance. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a world that had not changed. I was the only thing in that world that had changed, fundamentally and completely and without warning, in the last 11 minutes. "There's one more folder," Sandra said gently, "the one called Sophie." "I know," I said. "Give me a minute." I gave myself 60 seconds. I counted them, slowly, staring at the faded label of the succulent pot, which read in small green letters, "Desert Rose." I thought about my grandmother's house, the cedar closets and the amber kitchen light and the third porch step with its familiar creak. I thought about the way Daniel's hands had felt holding mine under the dinner table the night before. I thought about the word asset. I opened the Sophie folder. Sophie Merriam had been engaged to Daniel Hartley 4 years ago. I found this out from the contents of the Sophie folder, which contained, among other things, a handwritten note in Eleanor's small, precise script, the same handwriting as the card in the champagne basket that had said, "For my darling son and his new bride. With all my love." The note was a to-do list. It itemized in neat numbered points the steps Eleanor had taken to acquire control of Sophie Merriam's property, a duplex in the Castlemont district, purchased with an inheritance from Sophie's father. The list included items such as 1. Establish friendly contact, gain trust. 2. Position D as cohabiting for minimum 6 months. 3. Introduce POA concept as estate planning, mutual protection. 4. Identify notary, CRL contact. 5. Move on transfer within 90-day window. The list went on for 9 items. At the bottom, in slightly different pen, as if added later, SM became suspicious at step 6. Engagement terminated. D requires more effective approach for next target. Next target. The words sat there, plain and precise and utterly matter-of-fact, and I thought of myself in Eleanor's kitchen in those early months of dating Daniel, when she had smiled at me and called me dear, and asked about my grandmother's house with her eyes like 2 still pools of careful water. I thought of myself being assessed, evaluated, found suitable. I was next target. There was a second document in the Sophie folder, a printed photograph clearly taken from a phone of a handwritten list of names. There were 4 names on the list. Sophie Merriam was crossed out. The third name, mine, Claire Matthews, had a small check mark beside it and the word confirmed in pencil. I was the third name on a list of women. There was a 4th name below mine with nothing beside it yet. A pipeline, a list of assets to be acquired, a business plan. I became aware of a sound and realized it was coming from me. Not a cry, not a sob, but a long, slow exhale, the sound of air leaving a body that has been holding itself together for as long as it can. Sandra moved, quietly, and put a glass of water on the desk beside me. I looked at it. I did not pick it up. I looked at the screen, and then I looked away from it, at the photograph of Sandra's daughters on the shelf. 2 girls laughing at something outside the frame, their heads tipped toward each other, faces alight with some private joke, and I thought about what I was going to do, and then, for the first time since I had sat down in this office, I felt something other than the cold, clear stillness that had overtaken me. I felt anger, not the hot, uncontrolled anger of shock and hurt, not yet. This was something different. This was the slow, deep ignition of something structural, something load-bearing, the kind of anger that does not dissipate into tears or screaming, but instead settles into the bones and says, quietly and with absolute certainty, "No, not like this, not me." I straightened in the chair. I picked up the glass of water and drank it. I turned to Sandra. "Can you print all of this?" I asked. Sandra printed everything. She did it quickly and without comment, feeding sheets into the small laser printer on the credenza, watching the pages stack, and I thought that whatever her reasons for calling me, the decency of a stranger, the instinct of someone who had seen enough of the world to recognize an injustice taking shape, I owed her a debt I could not repay with anything as simple as gratitude. When the printing was done, I folded the pages into my bag alongside the USB drive. I asked if I could use the office phone. She said yes and stepped out and pulled the door mostly closed behind her. I called Maya first. Maya Chen had been my best friend since we were 19 years old and had been paired as roommates in our first year of university, an arrangement that had started as administrative luck and had become one of the foundational facts of my adult life. She was a civil litigator. She was also at 7:55 in the morning, deeply asleep, and she picked up on the 3rd ring in the low, rough voice of someone dragged unwillingly from a good dream. "Claire," she said, "why are you calling me? You're on your honeymoon." "I'm at the hotel," I said. "I need you to wake up." Something has happened. There was a brief silence, and then I heard the sound of Maya becoming alert. A rustling, the click of a light. The transition from asleep to present that she could accomplish in under 10 seconds when necessary, a skill I had always admired. "Tell me," she said. I told her. All of it. I spoke quietly and steadily, and I recited the facts in the order I had discovered them. And I listened to the quality of Maya's silence change as I spoke, from the silence of someone listening carefully to the silence of someone very controlled and very angry indeed. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where is he now?" "Asleep in the room. He doesn't know I've found any of this." "Good," she said. "Keep it that way for now. Do not go back to that room, Claire. Do you hear me? Do not go back until you have a plan." "I'm already making one," I said. "I know you are," she said. "That's why I love you. Give me 30 minutes. I'm going to call Robert." Robert Chen, no relation to Maya, a coincidence that still amused them both, was the best real estate and property attorney in the city. He was also Maya's former law school professor and current friend, and he owed her 3 favors by her count. I trusted Maya's count. I hung up and dialed my father's number. Thomas Matthews picked up on the first ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant my father was 71 years old and slept the light, alert sleep of a man who had worked night shifts for 30 years, that he had been sitting with his morning tea, probably in his kitchen on Maple Drive, watching the news. "Claire Bear," he said, using the name I had spent most of my 20s professing to hate and secretly hoarding. "Good morning. How's the most beautiful bride in the world?" "Dad," I said, "I need you to listen to me." There was a pause. My father was not a man given to unnecessary words. "I'm listening," he said. I told him what I had found, and the line went very quiet, and when my father spoke again, his voice was different. It was the voice he used in serious situations, level and clear, with a particular quality of stillness that I associated, from childhood, with the moments before a decision. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have told you months ago and didn't, because I was afraid of what it would do to you, and I told myself I was waiting for more proof. I'm not going to make that mistake twice." "Dad, I hired someone," he said, "a private investigator, in March. I'd heard, a friend of a friend, a man who works in property law on the West Side. I'd heard a rumor about Daniel Hartley. Something about a previous engagement, a woman named Sophie, and a property dispute that was settled quietly before it became public. I hired Marcus Reed to look into it. He gave me his report 2 weeks ago." I closed my eyes. "It confirms what you found," my father said. "And more. There are gambling debts, Claire. $340,000 owed to private creditors and one loan entity in Nevada. They have a deadline of 6 months from today. Your house. The value of your grandmother's house. It's what they plan to use. The debt is in Daniel's name, but Eleanor is the guarantor. She put herself on the hook for it." "She put herself on the hook for his debts," I said, and the shape of it settled into place with the particular, terrible clarity of a structure becoming visible. The beams and the load paths and the way every piece supported every other piece. Eleanor had guaranteed Daniel's debts. Eleanor needed the money. Eleanor had a plan. Daniel was both the instrument and the reason. "Come home," my father said. "Bring everything you have. I'll be there." "Not yet," I said. "I need to do something first." I went back to Suite 412. I want to explain why, because it was not recklessness and it was not naivety. I had thought about it in the elevator, 3 floors up, watching my reflection harden in the polished bronze doors. And I had decided that I needed to look Daniel in the face. I needed to hear what he would say when I showed him what I knew. I needed, perhaps most importantly, to confirm that the man I had married the night before was the man I now believed him to be. And not because I was hoping, at this stage, to find a different answer, but because I needed to see it clearly and completely and in full, so that no part of me could ever look backward and wonder if I had been wrong. I was done being the woman who told herself she was imagining things. The suite was quiet when I let myself in. The curtains were still drawn, the duvet still heaped and warm-looking, Daniel's form a long, dark shape beneath it. On the bureau, the champagne basket sat with its card still propped against it, and the sight of Eleanor's handwriting, "With all my love," sent a cold, precise wire of disgust through me that I had not expected for its cleanness. I set my bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, and I said his name. "Daniel." He stirred. He surfaced slowly, the way he always did, heavy-lidded, unhurried, one hand moving toward me automatically in the half-conscious way of someone used to reaching for warmth. "Hey," he said, voice blurred with sleep. "What time is it? Did you find the earrings?" "I need you to sit up," I said, "and I need you to look at me." Something in my voice did it. The flatness, the particular quality of absolute calm that is not peacefulness, but its opposite. He opened his eyes fully and looked at me, and I watched the moment he registered my expression, and I watched the blood leave his face. "Claire." I put the printed pages on the bed between us. I placed them carefully, not through them, because I was not in the business of drama for its own sake. I placed them, and I watched him look at them, and I watched his face move through a sequence of expressions, confusion, recognition, terror, in the space of perhaps 4 seconds. His hand moved toward the papers and then stopped. "Where did you get these?" he said. "Your mother left her USB drive under the bed," I said. "The housekeeper found it. Sandra at the front desk called me." I paused. "She called me and told me to come alone and not tell you. I'm choosing, right now, to believe that was good advice." The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever been in. Outside the window, the city was going about its morning, indifferent and continuous, and in the room the only sounds were our breathing and the distant abstract noise of traffic. And Daniel sat in the white bed with the printed evidence of what he had done laid out between us, and he said nothing, and nothing, and nothing. And finally, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Like what?" I said. "Like me finding out?" "Like, Claire, it's complicated. I never meant to—" "I'm going to stop you," I said. "I've read the emails, 14 months of emails. I've read the power of attorney with my forged signature on it. I've read the Sophie file." I watched him flinch at that last one. "So I want you to tell me the truth, and I want you to tell it to me cleanly and without the word complicated. And if you're able to do that, I said might, be willing to have a civil conversation about what happens next. But if you give me excuses, if you minimize this, if you look at the ceiling and talk about how you were going to fix everything eventually, I will walk out that door, and the next person who speaks to you about this will be a lawyer." He looked at the papers. He looked at his hands. He looked, finally, at me, and his face was a landscape of shame. Genuine shame, I believed, the kind that is not useful, but is at least honest. "The debts are real," he said. 340,000. I owe it to people who don't wait politely for payment. My mother found out 8 months before I met you. Before I met you, I need you to know that. And she came up with a plan. She's done it before." He stopped. "Sophie," I said. "Sophie," he agreed quietly. "Sophie figured it out. Before the wedding. She left. My mother said the approach needed to be more. She said I needed to actually make the woman care about me, actually build something that felt real, so that she wouldn't be looking for the catch. She said if it felt real enough, it would be too late by the time you noticed anything." He stopped again and looked at me, and his voice, when he continued, was barely above a whisper. "But it did feel real to me, Claire. I want you to know that. I know that doesn't matter. I know it doesn't change anything. But it felt real." I thought about the painting at the Rosewood Gallery, the wash of deep blue and silver that he had described as the second before a storm breaks. I thought about the reading glasses on my nightstand and the green chipped mug in my cabinet and his thumb moving in slow circles across my knuckles the night before. I thought about not more than you care about staying out of debt. I looked at him for a long moment and I said very quietly, "You let her forge my signature." He closed his eyes. "You sat in your mother's kitchen 3 weeks before our wedding," I said, "and you discussed selling my grandmother's house, and you said that you cared about me and she told you it didn't matter, and you agreed with her, Daniel. You didn't disagree. You didn't walk out. You didn't call it off. You showed up at my house and you kissed me hello, and you asked about my day, and you sat at my grandmother's kitchen table and ate my food, and you knew." "I know," he said. "I know." "Get out of the bed," I said. "Get dressed. Call your mother and tell her to come here. And then you are going to sit in this room and you are not going to leave it because my father and my lawyer are on their way and you are going to be here when they arrive." He looked at me. "Do it," I said. "Call her now." Eleanor arrived 40 minutes later. She came in composed. That is the word. Composed. Perfectly and entirely composed, as if someone had pressed her smooth from the inside out. She was wearing cream-colored slacks and a navy blue blouse and her pearl earrings, and she carried a small leather handbag, and her silver hair was perfect. She came into the suite and looked at Daniel first, and the look she gave him was brief and measuring. And then she looked at me, and whatever she saw in my face caused a very slight shift in her expression. Not alarm, not guilt, just a subtle recalibration, the adjustment of someone shifting strategy. "Claire," she said, "I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding." I almost laughed. I want to be honest with you. I almost laughed because misunderstanding was so magnificently wrong for what had happened that it briefly struck me as darkly, genuinely funny. But I did not laugh. I said, "Sit down, Eleanor," in a voice I did not recognize, and she sat. I placed the printed pages on the coffee table between us. "Your USB drive," I said. "The housekeeper found it under the bed." I watched her eyes move to the pages and back to me, and in that fraction of a second I saw her assess, rapidly, precisely, exactly what the pages contained, what they proved, and what her options now were. "I've read all of it," I said. "The power of attorney, the purchase agreement, the emails going back 14 months, the Sophie file." I paused. "I've also spoken to my father. He hired a private investigator in March who's been documenting Daniel's debts and your involvement in the timeline. So there is no version of this conversation in which I don't know what you've done." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She looked at Daniel, who was sitting in the armchair by the window looking at the floor. She looked at me, and then she did the thing I should have anticipated and somehow didn't. She smiled. A thin, precise, absolutely controlled smile. The smile of someone who has been in difficult rooms before and has never once failed to find the exit. "Claire, dear," she said, in the voice she used for calling me dear, warm enough to feel like inclusion, careful enough to feel like a wall. "I understand that this looks dramatic, but you have to understand that we were trying to help. Daniel's situation is serious. We were frightened. We made choices that we perhaps should have discussed with you first, and I am sorry for that. Truly I am. But nothing has been signed. Nothing has been transferred. The document is a precaution. It was meant to be presented to you for your review and—" "Stop," I said. She stopped. "That document has a forged signature on it," I said. "My signature, which means it has already been used in the commission of a felony. And I have a PDF copy time-stamped, along with all 14 months of emails in which you and my husband—" the word came out level and deliberate, a stone set down carefully— "discussed the timeline for executing this plan without my knowledge or consent." I paused. "You can tell me this was all a misunderstanding. You can tell me it was meant to be discussed with me. You can say all of that, and then tomorrow morning you can say all of it again to a detective." Eleanor's smile did not disappear, exactly. It shifted. It became something slightly different, less warm, more careful, more like the thing I had always sensed beneath it. "You're being emotional," she said. "That's understandable. But you should think very carefully before you—" "Before I what?" I said. "Before I protect myself? Before I report a crime?" "Before you destroy this family," she said, and her voice, for the first time, carried something other than composure. There was a note in it, not fear, not quite, but something adjacent to it, a tightness that hadn't been there before. "Daniel is my son. Whatever has happened here, he is your husband, and he is my son, and you have the opportunity right now to handle this privately, to protect everyone involved, to—" "You put my name on a list," I said. She stopped. "A list of names," I said. "4 names. Women with property. Women you identified as targets. Sophie Merriam was crossed out. Mine had a check mark. There's a 4th name on the list." I watched her face. Was she next? After me, was she next? The silence in the room was profound. Daniel made a sound from the armchair, something low and wordless, not quite a groan, the sound of someone hearing something they cannot unhear. Eleanor looked at me, and for the first time, the composure was not quite holding. I could see the workings of it, like seams in a garment under pressure. "Eleanor," I said, "I'm going to tell you what is going to happen. My father is on his way. My attorney is on his way. You and Daniel are going to remain in this room until they arrive. You are not going to make any calls, you are not going to delete any files, and you are not going to leave. And when they arrive, we are going to discuss how this ends. Do you understand?" "And if I choose to leave?" she said. I picked up my phone from the coffee table and looked at it, and then looked at her. "I've already photographed and emailed copies of every document to 3 separate accounts," I said. "So if you'd prefer to handle this with lawyers rather than privately, go ahead, leave. But understand that the moment you walk out that door, I call Detective Morrison of the Fraud and Financial Crimes Unit, and the private investigator report goes with it, and we do this the other way." I set the phone down. "The choice is yours." Eleanor sat very still for a long moment. Then she put her handbag on her lap, and she folded her hands over it, and she looked at her son, and whatever passed between them in that look I cannot fully describe. It was not quite recrimination, not quite love, not quite fear. It was something older and more complicated, the look of 2 people who have been bound together by something they cannot name and cannot dissolve. Daniel looked away first. "Fine," Eleanor said. "We'll wait." My father arrived at 9:10. He came in quietly, the way he always moved, with a deliberate, economical calm that had always made me feel, as a child and still, that whatever was happening, it was manageable. He was carrying a folder, and he looked at Eleanor for a moment without greeting her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything, and the air between them was like the air between 2 chess players who have just understood each other's strategy. He put the folder on the coffee table beside my printed pages. He sat down next to me and put his hand briefly on mine. One squeeze, firm and warm, and then he looked at Daniel. "Your debt collectors have a name," he said. "A company called Ridgeway Capital. Marcus Reed, the investigator, found them 2 weeks ago. $340,000 with a penalty clause that takes it to $415 if not cleared within 6 months." He opened the folder and removed a single page. Ridgeway Capital is a registered LLC. The sole director is listed as Graham Hartley. Graham Hartley. I looked at Eleanor. Her expression did not change, but the quality of her stillness changed, became less chosen, more braced. "Daniel's uncle," I said slowly. "Your brother-in-law." "Gerald's younger brother," my father said. "Eleanor's brother-in-law. He's been holding Daniel's debt for 3 years at an interest rate of 18%. The original sum was $190,000. He paused. Graham Hartley and Eleanor have been in regular communication for the duration of that period. The debt structure, the timeline, the involvement of property as the settlement vehicle. It was agreed between them. The room went very, very quiet. Your own family, I said, looking at Eleanor. You're not just running a scheme to protect your son. You and Daniel's uncle have been running a scheme together. He loans Daniel money at criminal interest rates. The debt gets unmanageable. You identify a solution. I stopped. How many times? Eleanor did not answer. Sophie Merriam was the second name with a line through it, my father said. He did not look at Eleanor when he said it. He looked at me. The first name on that list is a woman named Patricia Holden. She was Daniel's girlfriend 7 years ago. She had a property in the Eastern District. The matter was settled out of court according to Marcus's records, with a non-disclosure agreement. I felt in that moment the particular, vertiginous sensation of a structure becoming fully visible. Every beam and load path and connection point illuminated at once. The full engineering of what had been built around me. A family operation. 3 generations of a family, grandmother to son to uncle, running a scheme against women with property. Patricia Holden, Sophie Merriam, Claire Matthews, a name below mine on the list. My grandmother's house, I said, and my voice was extraordinarily calm. Your son's uncle would have taken part of the proceeds as repayment of the debt, and you would have taken the rest. And Daniel would have been clear, and the cycle would have started over. I looked at her. How much would you have kept? Eleanor said nothing. I know the answer, I said. It's in the emails. 40% to Graham, 60% to you and Daniel. After the sale of my house for below market value, that would have been, let me think, approximately $384,000 to you and Daniel, and $256,000 to Graham. I looked at her steadily. You were going to steal my grandmother's house and split it with the man who lent your son money specifically, so he'd need it stolen. It's not stealing, Eleanor started. It's fraud, Maya's voice said from the doorway. I had not heard her come in. She was standing in the open doorway of the suite in yesterday's clothes, clearly dressed in a hurry, her hair pinned up imperfectly, a leather satchel over her shoulder, and the expression she wore in a courtroom, cool, absolutely certain, professionally merciless. Behind her, in the corridor, I could see another man I recognized, Robert Chen, 60-something, compact and sharp-eyed, holding a briefcase. He nodded to me once as he followed Maya in. Forgery of a legal document, Maya said, setting her satchel on the desk and opening it. Identity fraud. Conspiracy to commit property fraud. Possibly wire fraud if the emails cross state lines, which they did, because Graham Hartley's server is registered in Nevada. She pulled out a legal pad and a pen and looked at Eleanor with an expression of professional detachment. I've already been on the phone with a colleague in the fraud unit. They're expecting a call. She paused. Now, my client is prepared to give everyone in this room the opportunity to make a statement before that call is made. That courtesy expires in 45 minutes. Robert Chen sat down and opened his briefcase. My father sat beside me and said nothing. Daniel looked at the floor. Eleanor looked, for the first time in my experience of her, uncertain. Not afraid, not quite, but uncertain, the slight displacement of someone who has operated in one mode for a long time and has just realized the terrain has changed. The notary, Robert said, not looking up from the document he was reading. The name on the stamp is Roberta Lentz. She has an office on Whitmore Street. She notarized the forged power of attorney without the signatory present, which is both professional misconduct and a criminal offense. He looked up. Her name appeared in the Sophie Merriam matter as well. She is currently under investigation for an unrelated matter, and my understanding is that she will cooperate fully with any inquiry in exchange for consideration. He looked at Eleanor. So the notary is gone. Your paper is worth nothing. The house is not yours. The debt to Graham Hartley is not my client's concern. And the question of what comes next depends, in large part, on how cooperative you intend to be in the next 45 minutes. Eleanor sat with her hands folded over her handbag. She looked at her son. Daniel was looking at me. His face was, I don't know how to describe it exactly. Not repentant, not quite. Not the clean, simple face of remorse. Something more complicated. The face of someone who has spent years making a choice they told themselves wasn't a choice, and who is only now fully seeing what it has cost them. He looked like a man who had fallen a very long way and was only now understanding how far he had fallen. I looked back at him, and I thought about the green chipped mug in my cabinet, and I thought about, I do care about her. Mom and I felt, looking at him, a grief that I had not expected, clean and cold and completely without room for the love that had been there before it. I want the marriage annulled, I said. We were married less than 24 hours ago. Robert. He nodded. The grounds are fraud. He represented himself as a man intending to enter a legitimate marriage, and the evidence is that his intent was fraudulent from the beginning. The Sophie Merriam file alone establishes a pattern. Robert nodded again. I want the power of attorney document invalidated and officially recorded as a forgery. I want the purchase agreement null and void. I want every document in that USB drive preserved as evidence. I looked at Eleanor, and I want a statement from both of you, naming Graham Hartley and Roberta Lentz before you leave this room. Eleanor looked at me for a long moment. She was, I realized, making the calculation, the same precise, unsentimental calculation she had always made, the same rational assessment of costs and benefits that had made her, in another life, under other circumstances, someone formidable. She was calculating whether there was still a play, still an angle, still something to gain or preserve. And I watched her arrive at the conclusion, slowly and without drama, that there was not, that the materials on the table, in the satchels, in the email copies sent to 3 accounts, they were sufficient, that Robert Chen was not a man making empty threats. That Marcus Reed's report was sitting in a folder with the rest of it, that she had, for the first time in what was apparently a long career, miscalculated. She opened her handbag and took out a pen. "All right," she said, and the 2 words were quiet and utterly without inflection, stripped of the warmth and the careful warmth effect and the pearl earring composure. Just 2 plain words, the sound of a mechanism running down. "What do you want to know?" The statement took 2 hours. Robert conducted it with the methodical patience of a man who does this for a living and finds it, in some way, deeply satisfying. Not cruelly, just the satisfaction of someone good at their job in a situation that requires their particular skills. Eleanor gave the statement in full, naming Graham Hartley's involvement, naming Roberta Lentz, confirming the timeline of the scheme, describing with a kind of flat, drained precision how the target selection worked, how the debt structure functioned, how the notary had been compensated. Daniel gave a separate statement, shorter, less organized, the statement of someone who had not prepared it and was saying it in real time, rather than from a plan. He named Graham Hartley. He confirmed the debts, the timeline, the emails. He confirmed that he had known, at the time of the proposal, that the purpose of the marriage was to access my property. He said, again, that he had cared about me. He said it quietly, and I believe it was true, and I believe that it was one of the least important true things I had ever heard. When it was done, Robert made his calls. My father sat beside me on the small sofa near the window, and Maya was at the desk typing notes, and the October light came through the curtains and lay warm and gold across the carpet. And Eleanor sat in the armchair across from me, with her handbag on her lap and her pearl earrings in, and her face the face of someone who has finally, completely stopped performing. "I would like to take my son and go," she said. "You can go," I said. "Both of you." They left. Eleanor first, then Daniel. And at the door, he paused and looked back at me, one more time, and I met his eyes, and there was nothing left to say, and he knew it, and he left. The door clicked shut. Maya was watching me from the desk. My father was watching me from the sofa, and I sat for a moment in the quiet of the room that had been, 12 hours ago, the most romantic room I had ever been in. The candles still in their holders, the champagne basket still on the bureau with Eleanor's card, and I breathed, long and slow. And then I stood up, and I walked to the bureau, and I picked up the card. For my darling son and his new bride, with all my love, and I folded it once, and I put it in the wastepaper basket. Not dramatically, just put it down, done with it. "Are you okay?" Maya asked. "No," I said, "but I will be." The annulment was granted 11 weeks later on the grounds of fraudulent intent. Robert Chen filed the petition on a Tuesday morning, and by the time the October light had shifted to the gray and quiet light of December, the marriage existed only as a case number in a county courthouse and a particular, complicated weight in my chest that I was learning, slowly, to put down. Graham Hartley was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and predatory lending. Roberta Lentz surrendered her notary license and cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. Eleanor Hartley pled no contest to fraud-related charges, conspiracy, forgery, abuse of power of attorney process, and received 3 years probation, mandatory restitution of legal costs, and 200 hours of community service. Her apartment on Pemberton Court, mortgaged at over 80% of its value, was foreclosed within 4 months of the investigation becoming public. Daniel's debt collectors found him in February. Sophie Merriam, who had signed a non-disclosure agreement 4 years ago that was voided by the criminal proceedings, gave a victim impact statement. Patricia Holden gave one too. "I kept my grandmother's house." It is late April now, 8 months after the wedding, and I am sitting on the porch of the house on Linden Street in the early evening, with a glass of wine and a blanket over my knees, and the magnolia tree doing what it does every April, blooming in those great, extravagant, creamy fists of white, the petals enormous and slightly unreal-looking in the fading light, the scent of them drifting across the porch in warm, slow waves. The third step still creaks. I have decided to leave it that way. My father is inside, in the kitchen, doing what he has done every Sunday evening for the past 6 months, cooking something from one of my grandmother's recipe cards while complaining, lovingly, about the illegibility of her handwriting. I can hear him through the screen door, muttering pleasantly at the stove, and the smell of garlic and butter is drifting out through the mesh, and the kitchen light is amber and warm behind him. Maya called an hour ago, just to check in, the way she has done every few days since October. Not smothering, just present, the way good people are present. I told her about the magnolia. She said she was coming for dinner next Sunday. I said good. I think about Daniel sometimes in the way you think about a scar, not with pain exactly, but with the particular awareness of a place that was once open and is now closed. I think about the painting at the gallery, the blue and silver wash, the second before the storm breaks. I wonder if he meant it when he said it, and then I decide it doesn't matter, because the meaning of a thing and the use a person puts it to are 2 different things entirely, and I have learned, in the last 8 months, to tell the difference. The magnolia drops a single petal onto the porch step, white and wide as a palm. My grandmother bought this house with 11 years of double shifts and did not leave it to me so that it could become a debt settlement. She left it to me because she believed I was someone who would know how to keep it. I am learning, slowly and with some difficulty, and with the particular stubbornness of a person who has finally decided to stop being afraid of her own strength, that she was right. I am not the woman who told herself she was imagining things. I am the woman who came alone and looked, and did not look away. That is enough. For tonight, on the porch in April, with my father in the kitchen and the magnolia doing its annual impossible thing, that is more than enough.